The morning it all
I'm
began.
not
The
hungry.
cold felt sharper than usual, the kind that bites into skin and settles deep in the bones, as if the city itself were tired of carrying so many broken stories. He stood outside the bakery with a paper cup of coffee gone lukewarm, watching steam rise from the street grates and disappear into a gray sky that never seemed to lift. Life had already taken so much from him, yet he had no idea that a single quiet act of kindness, repeated every morning without witnesses or expectations, was about to collide with a truth powerful enough to shake everything he thought he understood. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet power of doing good when no one is watching, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this live because people like you believe they matter. He was a single father, the kind who woke before dawn not because he wanted to, but because responsibility demanded it. His wife had died 3 years earlier after a sudden illness that arrived like a thief and left without apology. Since then, every morning it followed the same rhythm. He dressed his daughter in clothes laid out the night before, packed her lunch with careful precision, and walked her to the neighbor's apartment before heading to work. There was no room for chaos, no space for self-pity. Love had turned into discipline, and discipline was the only way he knew how to survive. Every morning, just outside the bakery where he grabbed discounted bread before heading to the construction site, he saw the same woman sitting on the cold concrete. She was thin in a way that suggested hunger had become familiar, not shocking. Her coat was old and frayed, its color faded into something that no longer belonged to any season. She never begged loudly or waved signs. She simply sat with her hands folded, eyes lowered, as if trying to make herself smaller than the world already had. People passed her by with practiced indifference, stepping around her like a pothole on the sidewalk. The first morning he noticed her, he did nothing. He told himself he couldn't afford it, that he already carried enough weight. By the second morning, guilt followed him into the bakery. By the third, he bought an extra loaf and placed it gently beside her as he walked past, not waiting for thanks. She looked up, surprised, eyes wide like someone who had forgotten what generosity felt like. He nodded once and kept moving. That small act became routine. Every morning he brought her something warm to eat, sometimes coffee, sometimes fruit, sometimes a few extra dollars folded carefully so they would not fall apart. He never asked her name. He never asked her story. He didn't want to know, not because he didn't care, but because caring too much felt dangerous. He was barely holding himself together as it was. Weeks passed, and winter tightened its grip. Snow piled up along the sidewalks, turning the city into a maze of white and gray. The woman remained there every morning, her presence as constant as his own exhaustion. Slowly, something changed. She began to smile when she saw him coming. Her shoulders relaxed. The fear in her eyes softened into something that almost resembled peace. For a few minutes each day, she was no longer invisible. At home, his daughter noticed the difference in him before he did. He seemed lighter, less burdened by the quiet grief that had settled into their lives. Helping someone else had given his pain somewhere to go. It reminded him that even broken people could still be useful, still be kind. One morning, the bakery was unusually busy, and he was late. When he stepped outside, coffee in hand, he saw the woman was gone. Her spot was empty, the concrete bare except for a thin layer of snow. His chest tightened with a strange sense of loss. He told himself she had probably moved on, found shelter, found something better. That should have been a good thing. Still, the absence felt heavier than he expected. The next day, she was back, sitting straighter than before. Her coat was the same, but her hair was neater, her hands steadier. She looked at him with an intensity that made him pause. He handed her the food as usual, and for a moment, it felt like she wanted to say something important. But she didn't. She simply nodded, eyes shining with something unspoken. Then came the morning that changed everything. He arrived earlier than usual, the sky just beginning to lighten. From a distance, he noticed movement around the woman's usual spot. Black vehicles lined the curb, their engines humming softly. 4 men in dark suits stood nearby, alert and imposing, their posture unmistakably protective. Another man, older, with a briefcase and a serious expression, was speaking quietly to the woman. His first instinct was fear. He slowed his steps, heart pounding, wondering if she was in trouble or if something terrible had happened. The city felt suddenly unfamiliar, like a stage set for a scene he didn't understand. As he approached, the woman stood. She looked different now, not because her clothes had changed, but because her presence had. There was confidence in the way she held herself, a quiet authority that demanded attention. The man with the briefcase turned and noticed him, his expression shifting with recognition he couldn't place. The woman looked at him, really looked at him, and in her eyes was a depth of gratitude so profound it stole his breath. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and the world seemed to hold still. What he learned in the moments that followed unraveled every assumption he had made. She was not just a poor woman down on her luck. She was the sole heir to a vast estate, stolen from her through betrayal and forged documents after her husband's death. Powerful people had stripped her of everything, freezing accounts, taking properties, leaving her with nothing but the clothes she wore and the truth she carried. For months, she had lived on the streets, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the legal system to catch up to the corruption that had destroyed her life. The man with the briefcase was her lawyer. The bodyguards were there because the case had finally turned. Evidence had surfaced. Arrests were imminent. Her fortune, once thought lost forever, was about to be restored. And through all of it, during the coldest, darkest chapter of her life, one person had treated her like she mattered. He stood there stunned, struggling to process how the woman he had fed every morning was someone the world would soon recognize as powerful and wealthy. Shame flickered through him for even thinking it mattered. He hadn't helped her because she was important. He had helped her because she was human. She explained that during those months on the street, she had learned something she never knew when she lived surrounded by luxury. She learned what it meant to be unseen. She learned how easily people could turn away. And she learned that true character revealed itself in the smallest choices, made without applause. His kindness had given her strength when she was close to giving up. The food, the coffee, the quiet nods had reminded her that goodness still existed, even when the system failed. Days later, he received a letter. Inside was an offer that made his hands shake. She had established a foundation in his wife's name, dedicated to supporting single parents and families struggling to survive after loss. She offered him a position not as charity, but as partnership, recognizing his integrity and compassion as something rare and valuable. His daughter's education would be fully funded, his debts erased. His future, once narrow and uncertain, suddenly opened wide. But the greatest gift wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that his smallest actions had mattered more than he could ever measure. As the seasons changed, the city seemed brighter. The bakery still stood on the corner, the steam still rose from the grates, but the mornings felt different now. He still bought extra bread, still looked for faces others ignored, because kindness, once practiced, becomes part of who you are. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that compassion can change lives in ways we may never see, please take a moment now to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel so these stories can keep reaching the people who need them most. And before this story ends, leave a comment below telling us one small act of kindness you believe can change the world. In a world obsessed with recognition and reward, his story stood as a quiet reminder that the truest impact often comes without witnesses, that the people we help today may be fighting battles we cannot imagine, and that sometimes the simple act of showing up with warmth on a cold morning can echo far beyond that single moment, returning in ways that heal not just others but ourselves.